Welcome, everybody. As the WCSA president, I'm delighted and honored to introduce you today a very important book about the European Union, book which was already published by a Flemish publisher and a French one. Now, Cambridge University Press is going to publish it into English. The author is Rudy Aernoudt, professor of finance, University of Nancy and University of Ghent, Vice President of WCSA, member of EBAN, and much, much, much more. Maybe it's easier if Professor Aernoudt can also quickly add information about what I told about him, because his CV is impressive. And I think there is no organization he's not a board member of. Great. And he recently publishes this book, this very interesting book about the European Union, titled The European Union Watched from Inside, Observed from Inside. There is a title in Flemish, there is the title in French. We are looking forward with the final title and edition in English. So, Professor Aernoudt, or Dear Rudy, if I may, there are many books about the European Union and Europe in general. What's the added value of your book and what are its key concepts?
Dear Professor Di Andrea, first of all, thank you for asking me that question, because you are right. Every week there's a new book about Europe. So when people say, again, a book about Europe, what the hell you're writing a book about Europe? But you know, if I look to the books on Europe, I'm sometimes a bit puzzled because how they are written, but mostly they are written by people who are not inside. It's journalists or professors, with all my respect for professors, but not people who are inside. That's why I called the book, the word title in English is Europe Look Behind the Screens, because you want to know how Europe really works. And it's only from inside, if you say how Europe works, that you can give a vision for the future. So in my idea, what I wanted to do was giving a view from the inside, trying to do it in a very simple way, not using Eurocrat jargon, but making it accessible to everybody and making that we have a debate on the future of Europe, because I think it's important that people now say, where do you want to go? What is Europe?
Excellent. So for the readers, in which way your look is an insider look?
Well, it's an insider look. You know, you said something about my CV. Of course, not everything. If not, the podcast will be over. I am still senior economist at the European Commission. I was head of cabinet and friends at the European Social and Economic Committee. I have been many times to the European Parliament. I was in the Commission. I was a special advisor to the Belgian presidency. So I have seen a bit all these institutions from inside. And if you see them all from inside, it's easier than somebody who is just reading the press or reading the magazines or the brochures of the Commission and then doing something. So my vision was, if I, being in the Commission for almost 30 years and these European institutions, what is it? Is it perfect? No. What goes wrong? And I wanted to say in the book as well, what goes wrong in Europe? And from there onwards, let's say, do we need Europe? What is the cost of non-Europe? And what can we do for the future? So my vision for the future is in fact based on this experience. And that's what I think, what makes the book quite unique. The second thing which makes it unique, you know, I always when you read the books about Europe, you fall asleep. And I see that a lot of people already reading my book, they say, oh, the first time you're reading a book about Europe and we really like it, it's exciting, we cannot stop, we won't go into the end. So I wanted to give something which is exciting, which is not boring. It's not because it's about Europe that it should be borrowed stuff. It should be something nice and easy to write, even with some humor in the book.
I totally agree with you, with your readers, because I also had the same experience and impression when I read it in French. Although my French is very poor, it was very stimulating, and I went on reading, and it was easy to make sense. It was accessible also for a not great French speaker like me. You know, my best languages are English, German, Spanish, and a little Italian, you know.
Then you're the perfect example, Andrea, that I achieved my goal, because that's what I want to do. You know, make it easy to read, and it should not be. It's not because it should be intellectual and high level that it's a good book. You know, I think Europe is something that should be given to the people, and we're all Europeans. So everybody who likes to read should be capable to read it, to understand every sentence, every word. So I avoided Eurocrat words, Euro, you are gone. I really tried to make it accessible, and that's the whole idea, in fact, of the book.
considering your experience and your vision about the Union from inside, what are the Union's best strengths and worst weaknesses in this moment?
Well, the best strength is, and this seems quite paradoxically, is a crisis. Because what you always see, Europe, in fact, is there's no crisis. People are discussing, we are using the veto rights, nothing happens. But we see when there's a crisis that Europe is very, very strong. By the way, Europe is born based on a crisis. Europe is a child of the war. And then you see once they do that, each time there's a crisis, lots of things happen. It's thanks to the financial crisis that we have the banking union. It's thanks to the COVID crisis that we have the big Green Deal with 750 billion amounts. It's thanks to the Ukraine crisis that we start having acceleration energy transition. So in fact, in my whole book, I show that crises makes that Europe moves. And again, then I say, well, we have now accumulation of crises. We are still not fully out of COVID. We have the crisis in Ukraine. We have the energy crisis. We have inflation. We have stagflation. So all these ingredients makes that the added value of Europe is much bigger than it was years ago. And so now, in fact, that Europe is the one that can help us. And my point is that a lot of things we can do better together. So what I try to identify is what are the fields, what are the elements that we can do better on European level and what should not be done on European level. And I think one of the messages of the book as well is Europe should not interfere with everything. There are some things that we should no longer do. So for me, it's as important as say, what should Europe no longer do as what will be the future and what should Europe keep as priorities.
Excellent. In terms of weaknesses, what kind of reforms do you think could make the policy model, the governance model of the Union more effective?
Well, the first thing, you remember that 40 years ago, a long time ago, an excellent former minister of the United States, namely Henry Kissinger, he said, if I want to speak to Europe, who should I call? Well, today, it's still more relevant because now we have 7, 8, 9, whatever how you call it, presidents. And so this is something you should change. I think you should really rethink Europe. Europe has now almost 70 years old. So we should rethink the structure and say, how can we make it lean, clean, and simple? How can we make that represented in other countries as one voice? And that's why I think we should rethink. In France, we have the digital economy. We have digital solutions. One question, do members of the parliament have to come together in Brussels and Strasbourg to push the button, yes or no? Should it not be better at the members of the parliament or at their region to speak to the people? One question. Second question, we have all these committees like the Committee of the Region, the Economic Social Committee, but do we need them? We have today a lot of other ways to consult the citizens. So let's rethink from scratch. Let's rethink what we have to do. And once we defined what we should no longer do, then we can, of course, determine the structure. And I would plead for a much lean and cleaner structure than we have today.
Very clear, precise, and very easy understanding. Very good. I was wondering, as you were quoting the origins of the Union, which was not yet the Union, but was the European Community for Coal and Steel, also in the Schuman speech of May, you know, the famous speech by Robert Schuman, there was the concept of higher authority, which was pivotal to let Germany and France at the beginning to be the leaders. It's written already in the formal speech of Schuman. But the destiny of the Union was designed to be a kind of higher authority in which the system of the European Union became a real system, an effective system, as the whole was much important than the single parts.
I think in a question there are two things. The first thing is, the first question we should raise ourselves, what is the coal and steel of today? Because coal and steel, these were the strategic elements after the Second World War. Now the question is, what is coal and steel today? And that again, it will be the first question, what are the sectors, what are the ecosystems that you have to focus on? First question. Then the second question, if indeed we can show that for certain fields, it's much better to act at European level than at the national or regional level, then it's normal that the decision power should be on European level. But again, I'm not the one who says that everything should go on Europe. We should determine where do you have an added value at European level. And we have the famous principle of subsidiarity. If you really apply subsidiarity the way it is, subsidiarity means that you put the field in the field of competence, which is the lowest as possible, on the condition that is still efficient. So this means that what you put on European level, it means that this is the best level to do it. And then it's logic, if it is that level, that Europe can decide. And if Europe can decide, you can still say, well, why do they need a veto right? No, because if they decide, it's normal. And of course, speaking about decision, do we need that, if it is European level, do we need that every member state has a commissioner? How can you make that a company with 27 CEOs is working? This is not possible. So then we should open the debate again and say, why not have a commission with 12 members? And we have rotation for small countries. I think this is linked on efficiency, and that's what the member states should want. We should not forget that Europe is not a cohesion of member states, it's a cohesion of people, of citizens. And that was the famous idea of Monet.
Exactly. It's just a brief comment, not a real question in this case. I agree with you that not everything should be on the union. It's a multi-level design. So there must be space for the central government in Brussels. There must be space for the national state members. There must be space for the regions or even a smaller scale level. What I think is that sometimes, in my opinion, the distinctions among the different roles, who deals with what, when, and how, are not very clear sometimes. That's the impression also as a European citizen, and the scholar. So the problem is not to concentrate everything in Brussels or more power to the states. It's just to understand how to, my opinion, to make it more transparent to the citizens what's on Brussels' shoulders, what's on the states' shoulders, what's on the region's shoulders, and so on.
I agree with you on that. I was head of cabinet at regional level in Flanders and Wallonie, and federal level in Belgium, and at European level. So I did all the levels. And if you put them all together, it should become a lasagna. And there's no overlapping, and everybody is working together, and all together becomes a nice lasagna. That's what you have to do. And there again, we have the principle of subsidiarity, who makes a nice lasagna if you apply it. And we can apply it. We know how to do it.
Okay, so my proposal is that we will write a book together in the next future titled The European Union, the Lasagna Model.
A lasagna, no spaghetti. Okay, we do that.
Exactly.
And we know what we can put on the cover page.
Exactly, of course. And of course, we will write it into Italian, and we will translate it into English or in other languages. But I think the lasagna model can be a very good concept to clarify also, because, as a Bolognese, I am also proud that you chose the Bologna noodle food as a symbol of the structure of the union. So yes, very good. Excellent. And Althea, we have the pleasure and honor to be managed today from our movie director, as I call her, Althea Croce from Lewis University. She's a student from Lewis University. And Althea, have you any comment, any question to Professor Aernoudt?
First thing first, I think the idea of this book is simply brilliant, because you can have an insight on the institution. So what's really going on? What's the point of view from inside? That something that somehow is missing. I think this is the main reason why people are going to read the book. And this is simply great. My question would be if you have to, what's the main takeaway? Just because, of course, you touch so many areas, so many topics. Of course, you analyze the strengths and the weaknesses. But if you have to simplify in few words, what would you say to a citizen, a young citizen like me that is studying, is passionate about European studies and wants to be part of European institution and share those values?
Well, I would a bit look how you in the Middle Ages you proved the existence of God. You said, what would happen if God would not exist? Let's go back to Europe. What is the cost of non-Europe? Can you imagine that you have, again, Italy, and I assume Italy in one region, one country, not different regions. You have one Italy, one France, one Belgium, one Luxembourg, and there's no links, or they're just bilateral agreements. And so there you will not have a big market. We don't have something to say in the world because we are so tiny. So I think we should start from the cost of non-Europe, which is geopolitical, which at the same time is economic, and economically you can define, and you can, and in my book I say how many billions it means, the cost of non-Europe. And in fact, from that on, you said, okay, the question is not, do we want Europe or don't we want Europe, but what kind of Europe we want. And then, of course, we should learn from the past. Brexit. Brexit was people saying, we leave Europe. But I analyzed the press articles in Brexit before the months and the years before, how it was built. There's not one article about the big issue. It's article about small issues. Why bureaucrats are saying how corrupt a cucumber would be. That's what's shocking people. I can see when I go to Corsica and I say I'm from Europe, they said, oh, you are the one who forbid our cheese. You see? But this should not be Europe. This should not be what Europe is doing. So my message would be to masters like you are doing, make your thesis about saying, what is the most important thing that Europe should do? Not the small things. I call them in my book, the works of Hercules. Things that people say, they are impossible, but he did it and he succeeded. To give you one example, you're a student. Imagine, just imagine, let's dream. Imagine that all students from high school, from universities, all of them, 100% do an Erasmus. Means that you spend at least 5 months, if not more, in another university, in another language, in another culture. This is Europe. You would get friends, get married, get divorced, whatever, but you would have this whole culture living. And then if we do that, this is the best way. This is the best way to fight against populism. I always quote Pablo Neruda, who never travels is always right. If you travel in the mind by studying elsewhere, then you become a real European. So if you could have a generation that everybody does that, what I call Erasmus for all, then you would have a completely different Europe. That's just one thing, an example. And so this is one of my Hercules works. And I think it should be good for a student to think about it. What do you want from Europe? And to come back to my Brexit, isn't it ridiculous? Isn't it a shame that Brexit has been decided by the elderly people? Exactly. The young people didn't go to vote. And if they vote in majority, no, we want to stay. So it's the elder generation, like people like Andrea and me, who decides about you leaving Europe. Can you imagine that? We should avoid that. And we should think perhaps today about techniques that something like that will not happen again.
Okay, but we are not old people, my friend. We are older than Althea, of course. But okay, now I'm joking. But as far as I remember, the data about the voters pro-Brexit were not only much older people, but also rather uneducated people of the working class and often unemployed.
This is true as well, but if you look at in the population, at the age, if you would have the people less than 40, there will be a majority in favor of staying in Europe. And the second thing, but that's in my view as an economist, if you look at the regional level, the regions who touched the most subsidies from Europe were those who voted to leave, which I find an interesting element as well to think about. So for me, the role of Europe is not to be the San Nicola who's going subsidies everywhere. This is not the role of Europe. This is not where I see the added value. I see the added value from Europe in something completely different than that one.
Yes, I think that it would be also nice to see if Ulster and Scotland, and maybe also London, but London is more complicated, would start to claim their exit from the UK. Because as you remember, Nicola Sturgeon, the Prime Minister of Scotland, was already raising the claim for the exit of Scotland from the UK and hopefully joining the Union.
But I think my dream would rather be that we can find, we need one generation to digest the Brexit, and then perhaps UK could come back one way or another. That's how we can see it. I think the door is not definitively closed, and it's always strange to be very, very careful. I really regret Brexit, but at the same time, it was making things more easy. You refer to governance. Before you had always UK said, we don't want that for that reason. And then you had 3 or 4 countries said, yes, we agree with the president. We agree with United Kingdom. Now you cannot do it anymore. They have to make their own opinion. And so things are softer. And the second thing, which is very strange, I know that Italians like their language, like the French like their language, but now it's less sensible because the language that is spoken is English. And English, there's not one member state who have chosen English. Malta chose the Maltese. Irish Ireland chose Gaelic. So in fact, English is a kind of Esperanto. There's not one member state who has English as their official language. So these things becomes less sensitive. So this could lead to some efficiency as well. Do we need, question mark, do we need to translate every document into different languages? Can we not consider that documents which are used internally within the Commission and the Parliament and the Council, can we not work in one language? Of course, if a document is relevant for the citizens, then something different. Then you have to translate it to the language of the citizen. But all these internal elements, why should we not work in English? If you do that, of course, this would, of course, be a huge efficiency and we could save money. Just an example.
Okay, I think it's very clear. Althea, I wish you appreciated the feedback to your input.
A lot. Also, like in my experience, because I was actually in the UK few months, I started to study there a few months after the Brexit. And so people of my age actually share your opinion, as do I. Yes, like study now, confirm what you just said, and it's kind of also sad to see how like elderly has decided the future of all the new generation. So hopefully they're gonna like reverse the trend somehow and have a new relation with the Europe in a new kind of way.
Yeah, let's hope. I think the next generation might have a completely different view. But again, you need at least one generation to digest now. You cannot tomorrow say, let's go for another vote.
Of course.
Even if the polls now say it's 60 or 65%, you cannot do that. You need some time to think again and to go back again. But if you see all the money and time that has been lost by the people, and Andreas was speaking about the working class, but if you see how much that UK people lost when they left United Kingdom, this is amazing. And so the estimations that they are in my book as well, it's something like 80 billion a year. So that's much too much. And this is a pity that, there's another thing. I was a bit amazed when there was the Brexit. We had the re-election of the Dean of the University of Ghent. To become Dean, you need 66%. So we needed 7 rounds before one got appointed. But with 51%, you can leave your country. This is not logic. Sure.
I think it was a great presentation by Rudy Aernoudt, who introduced his new book. His new book, one of many, because he's also the author of a long list of works, including a very important book about COVID, titled COVID and Electroshock for Belgium, among his other many works. I want to thank Rudy Aernoudt for the discussion about his book. I want to thank Althea Croce for being with us as our movie director. Absolutely. This is the book.
L'Europe vue de l'intérieur in the French.
Published by
Mardaga.
Mardaga.
The Paris, Belgium editing house.
Excellent. And I invite all the colleagues, scholars, fellows, students to dig deeper in the European Union through a special guide as an insider guide. Thank you, both of you. See you soon. Thank you again, and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Althea. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.